A tenured professor thought he could publicly humiliate her with a sharp insult, but with just a few words, she turned the tables, and the internet hasn't stopped talking about it since. The crowd in the packed auditorium at the University of Cincinnati murmured with excitement. Debates were always a spectacle, but tonight felt different. Dr. Richard Lawson, the school's most outspoken professor, was about to face off against Karoline Leavitt, a young conservative voice making waves in political circles. Dr. Lawson, a respected figure in the political science department for over 20 years, leaned back in his chair with confidence. He had debated experienced politicians, crushed self-assured students, and prided himself on his ability to dismantle conservative arguments with ease. But this time, it wasn't just about policy, it was about power. Karoline, on the other hand, sat upright with an unreadable expression. She wasn't here to impress the professor or the skeptical students shifting in their seats. She was here because she believed her voice deserved to be heard. Even in her early 20s, she had already worked in the White House press office, held her own in the political arena, and knew what it was like to be underestimated. The moderator, a middle-aged professor with the difficult job of keeping the debate from spiraling into chaos, adjusted his glasses. Tonight's discussion will focus on the current political climate, media narratives, and the impact of young voices in shaping America's future. Let's begin. A round of applause. The floor was open. Dr. Lawson wasted no time. "I think we can all agree," he began, scanning the audience, "that misinformation has been one of the greatest threats to democracy in modern history. But what concerns me even more is the rise of so-called conservative influencers, young people who lack real political experience but are elevated simply because they say what certain groups want to hear." His voice was calm, his words carefully chosen. He didn't look at Karoline directly, not yet. He wanted the tension to build first. She remained silent, letting him speak. "Take, for example, Miss Leavitt here," he continued. "She's built a platform, yes, but what exactly qualifies her to dictate what's best for the country? Is it her age, her work under a controversial administration? Or is it simply that she knows how to repeat talking points that fire up a base?" A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Some students shifted uncomfortably, while others smirked. Karoline finally leaned forward, clasping her hands together. "Are you asking me a question, Professor, or just setting up your punchline?" A few murmurs spread through the room. Lawson tilted his head, feigning amusement. "I'm giving context, but sure, let's hear from you." She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I find it interesting that the same people who preach about amplifying young voices suddenly change their tune when those voices don't align with their views." Lawson chuckled. "Oh, come on. This isn't about suppressing voices. It's about credibility, about critical thinking. If someone is being used as a political mouthpiece, we have to ask, are they a leader or are they just playing a role?" Then he smiled, that smug, calculated smile, and said it. "Because from where I'm sitting, Miss Leavitt, you didn't get here on merit. You became Trump's puppet. The country? Is it her age, her experience working under a controversial administration, or simply her ability to repeat talking points that excite a particular base?" A few chuckles rippled through the audience as some students shifted uncomfortably while others smirked. Karoline finally leaned forward, clasping her hands together. "Are you asking me a question, Professor, or just setting up your punchline?" A few murmurs spread through the room. Lawson tilted his head, pretending to be amused. "I'm providing context. But sure, let's hear from you." She took a deep breath, her voice steady. "I find it interesting that the same people who claim to support young voices suddenly change their stance when those voices don't align with their views." Lawson chuckled. "Oh, come on. This isn't about silencing anyone. It's about credibility and critical thinking. If someone is being used as a political mouthpiece, we have to ask, are they a leader or are they just playing a role?" Then he gave that smug, calculated smile and delivered his final blow. Because from where I'm sitting, Miss Leavitt, you didn't get here on merit. You became Trump's puppet. The irony is that you stand in front of students every day preaching about independent thought, questioning authority, and speaking truth to power. But the moment someone does that from the other side, suddenly it's not critical thinking anymore. It's blind loyalty. Some students nodded, while others whispered among themselves. Dr. Lawson cleared his throat, shifting slightly in his chair. That's not what I'm saying, isn't it? Karoline shot back. You didn't challenge my views, ask me to defend a position, or debate policy. You just slapped a label on me and expected that to be enough. The professor opened his mouth, then closed it. Karoline seized the moment. The truth is, this isn't about me at all, is it? It's about control. It's about the fact that people like you are perfectly fine with young women speaking up, as long as they say the right things. The murmurs grew louder. A few students exchanged glances, while others leaned forward, caught between their expectations and the reality unfolding before them. Dr. Lawson let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. This is exactly what I mean. You take a simple critique and twist it into some grand persecution narrative. Karoline didn't blink. Right, because nothing says intellectual discourse like calling someone a puppet on live television. Moderator cleared his throat. But Karoline wasn't finished. I was raised to believe that if you want to win an argument, you use facts, logic, and reason. But when you can't do that, you use labels, you dismiss, you mock. And that's exactly what just happened here. Silence. Dr. Lawson's smirk was gone. He shifted again, adjusting his microphone, his usual confidence replaced with something else. Karoline wasn't angry or flustered, and that was the real problem for him. She had completely flipped the exchange on its head. But what happened next is when things truly started to spiral. The moment hung in the air like a static charge. The audience, once comfortably amused by Dr. Lawson's jab, now found themselves caught in an unexpected reckoning. Karoline didn't need to say anything more. The weight of her words had already landed. But before the moderator could step in, a voice from the back of the room cut through the tension. She's got a point. Heads turned. A male student in Daozite, a hoodie, arms crossed, leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Then another voice, a girl in the front row, hesitant but firm, spoke up. Yeah, if this was the other way around, people would be furious. Dr. Lawson's fingers twitched on the table, but he kept his composure. He was used to debates, used to handling students who thought they could challenge him. But this was different. Karoline had done something most people in his position never expected. She didn't crumble. The moderator tried to smooth things over. All right, let's keep this respectful. But the momentum had already shifted. A student near the aisle raised a hand. Professor, you always tell us to challenge ideas, right? But you didn't challenge hers. You just dismissed her. Dr. Lawson chuckled, though there was no humor in it. Look, let's not pretend this is some grand conspiracy. I made an observation. If she disagrees, fine. But let's not turn this into some moment of political martyrdom. Karoline raised an eyebrow. You call it an observation. I call it an excuse to avoid having an actual discussion. A low oof echoed from somewhere in the audience. Lawson let out a sharp exhale, his patience thinning. Miss Leavitt, you are free to say whatever you like. No one is silencing you. But when you step into the public arena, you should expect pushback. She smiled. Pushback is one thing, insults are another. He waved a hand dismissively. Oh, come on. If that's the worst thing you've been called, you're doing just fine. But before Karoline could respond, another student, one who had been recording on their phone, spoke up. Yeah. Except if a conservative professor called a liberal student a puppet for Biden, this place would be on fire right now. Murmurs turned into full-blown side conversations, and some students looked at each other as if realizing in real time just how glaring the double standard was. Dr. Lawson clenched his jaw. He knew he was losing control of the room. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The moderator stepped in, sensing the debate had veered into dangerous territory. Let's take a brief pause before moving on to the next topic. But it was too late. The debate may have continued that night, but the real story had already begun, and it wasn't going to stay in that auditorium for long. By the next morning, the clip was everywhere. By sunrise, the internet had already picked its sides. The 3-minute video, Dr. Lawson smugly calling Karoline a puppet and her razor-sharp response, was all over Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone had even uploaded it to YouTube with... The title read, "Liberal Professor Tries to Humiliate Karoline Leavitt. It Backfires Spectacularly." Within hours, the video had racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Conservative commentators jumped on it immediately, calling it yet another example of academia's thinly veiled hostility toward anyone who dared to challenge the dominant narrative. They praised Karoline for her composure, her ability to stay cool under pressure, and for refusing to let someone in a position of authority reduce her to a caricature. But the reaction wasn't just from the right. Students, some of whom weren't even conservative, began sharing their own experiences, stories of professors who shut down uncomfortable discussions, mocked dissenting views instead of debating them, and claimed to champion free speech only when the right people were speaking. What started as a viral moment had turned into something much bigger. And Dr. Lawson? He wasn't handling it well. He saw the clip that morning in his office. Someone had sent it to him with a single-word caption, "Yikes." At first, he scoffed. He had been in the public eye before. He knew how these cycles worked. People moved on. The internet found a new outrage. This would pass. But then, the emails started coming, not from strangers, but from faculty members and colleagues. They weren't outright condemning him, but they were keeping their distance. The administration sent a polite but firm message about avoiding inflammatory remarks in academic settings. And then there were the students. Dr. Lawson had always been a respected figure, even among those who disagreed with him, but now some were looking at him differently. Students who once greeted him in the halls now avoided eye contact. Others, students he once considered allies, were no longer eager to defend him. And Karoline? She hadn't said a word since the debate. She didn't need to. The clip spoke for itself, and the longer it spread, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about one debate, it was about something much bigger. But the real storm was still coming. Dr. Lawson had always thought of himself as untouchable, a respected academic, a seasoned debater, someone whose authority in the classroom and on campus had never been questioned. But now he was the subject of headlines, and not just in conservative media. Mainstream outlets had started picking up the story. The headlines were everywhere. University professor under fire for calling conservative speaker Trump's puppet. Debate clip sparks national conversation on bias in academia. Did this professor cross the line? Students speak out. It wasn't just a bad day at work anymore. It was a full-blown PR disaster. Emails flooded Dr. Lawson's inbox, some supportive, many scathing. The university administration had called him in for a discussion about professionalism in public forums. Even faculty members who usually shared his views weren't eager to defend him. But the worst part? His students. Some were openly challenging him now, questioning how he handled opposing viewpoints in class. Others had stopped speaking up altogether, afraid that disagreeing with him might mean being labeled, dismissed, or worse, mocked. For the first time in his career, Dr. Lawson felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. Meanwhile, Karoline wasn't just watching the fallout. She was navigating her own. While she had gained overwhelming support, backlash came from the usual places: anonymous threats, DMs telling her to stay in her lane. Some tried to paint her as a provocateur, accusing her of staging the moment for political clout. But she didn't have to defend herself. The facts were on her side. She hadn't come to the debate to start a fight. She hadn't thrown the first insult. She had simply refused to be belittled. And for that, the world had taken notice. The more people watched the clip, the clearer it became. Dr. Lawson didn't lose because he debated poorly. He lost because he never debated at all. But what happened next would change everything for both of them. By the following evening, Dr. Lawson was trending on Twitter, not just in academic circles, but in mainstream news. The university had been hoping to ride it out, assuming the internet would move on. But then the petition changed everything. It wasn't just a viral clip anymore. It had sparked a nationwide conversation about free speech, academic bias, and the power dynamics between professors and students. And the pressure was mounting. Late that night, Lawson sat alone in his office, scrolling through the headlines. Professors' smug insult backfires as students demand respect for debate. Karoline Leavitt shuts down liberal professor, and the internet loves it. Is higher education failing its students? Controversial debate sparks national discussion. He felt a surge of frustration. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. For years, he had dominated these discussions, always in control, always the intellectual authority. He knew how to command a room, how to challenge students without outright humiliating them. He had built his career on being the professor who always had the last word, but now he was the one being dissected, analyzed, and judged. And Karoline? She hadn't even responded to media requests. She didn't need to. Her silence was more powerful than any statement she could have made. Meanwhile, back on campus, the energy had shifted. Karoline wasn't just the girl from the debate anymore. Students were starting to see her differently. Even some who disagreed with her politics respected how she had handled herself. And then came the email. Dr. Lawson's stomach tightened as he read the subject line. Upcoming. Meeting to discuss classroom conduct and faculty standards. He exhaled sharply. So this was how it started. But the final blow? That was still on its way. Sitting across from the university's academic review board, arms crossed, expression tight, he realized this meeting wasn't just a formality. The room was small, sterile, and filled with a tension he could no longer ignore. The room had the kind of cold, sterile atmosphere where major decisions were made behind closed doors. The dean of faculty, a sharp-eyed woman who had been at the university longer than Lawson, folded her hands on the table. Professor Lawson, you've been a respected member of this institution for over 2 decades. That's not in question. Lawson nodded stiffly, waiting for the but. However, she continued, your conduct at the debate has created a problem that extends beyond you. There it was. One of the board members, a younger administrator, leaned forward. We're facing pressure from donors, students, and media outlets. The petition has gained more traction than we anticipated. This isn't just about you and Miss Leavitt anymore. It's about the university's reputation. Lawson clenched his jaw. So what? You want me to apologize? The dean exhaled, exchanging a glance with the others before answering. We need you to make a statement clarifying your remarks, a public one. Lawson's lips pressed into a thin line. He had spent years shaping young minds, challenging ideas, pushing boundaries, and now, because of one moment, one viral clip, he was being told to kneel to the court of public opinion. Absolutely not. His voice was firm, defiant. I won't be part of this ridiculous overcorrection. I didn't do anything wrong. The room fell silent before the dean leaned back, a slight frown on her face. "Then I suggest you start updating your CV." Lawson froze. "Excuse me?" She remained calm. "If you refuse to cooperate, we can't guarantee your position here will remain secure. We're not firing you, Richard, but you've put us in a situation where we have to make a choice. And between you and the institution always wins." The weight of her words settled on him, his pulse pounding. After years of loyalty, prestige, and tenure, he was being pushed out, not by Karoline, but by his own actions. Meanwhile, Karoline's world was shifting in the opposite direction. As Lawson sat in silence, grappling with the collapse of his career, her phone was flooded with messages from reporters, political commentators, and conservative figures eager to hear from her. But she didn't rush to speak or ride the wave of outrage. She wasn't interested in being another fleeting headline. Instead, she took a step back, letting the moment speak for itself, knowing that sometimes silence was the most powerful statement of all. She let the moment breathe and focused on something bigger. Then came an invitation, a well-known conservative. Think Tank reached out, asking if she'd be interested in giving a talk about free speech on college campuses. Nothing too formal, just a conversation about what had happened, how she handled it, and what it revealed about political discourse. At first, she hesitated. She had never set out to be a symbol of anything. But then she thought about the students who had approached her after the debate, the ones who had said, "I don't agree with you, but I respect how you handled yourself." And she realized this wasn't just about politics, so she said yes. The event was supposed to be small, but by the time the day arrived, the auditorium was packed. Students, faculty, local media, all eager to hear what she had to say. And she delivered. She didn't attack Dr. Lawson, nor did she gloat about what had happened. Instead, she spoke about the importance of real debate, of listening to each other even when it's uncomfortable, of refusing to be silenced but also refusing to become a caricature of what others expected. And by the time she finished, she had done something no viral clip ever could. She had turned a moment into a movement. She had proven she wasn't just the girl who clapped back, she was a voice worth listening to. And as for Dr. Lawson, he was about to learn a hard lesson about the world he thought he understood. Standing before his packed lecture hall, he knew this would likely be his last class. He had made his choice, no apology, no public statement, no concession. The university hadn't fired him outright, but the writing was on the wall. His courses had been quietly reassigned, his faculty email flooded with both outrage and defense, and more students than ever were questioning whether he had truly been the champion of debate he always claimed to be. He had lost control of the narrative, and worse, he had lost their respect. He could have salvaged his reputation, turned this moment into something meaningful, admitted his mistake, shown that he was bigger than his own ego. But he wouldn't. Instead, he ended his final lecture with a bitter remark. "Enjoy your echo chambers. You've all made it clear that you don't want real discourse. You just want your side to win." Some students clapped, others shook their heads. And just like that, he walked out, leaving behind the career he had once believed was untouchable. Karoline, meanwhile, was preparing for something far bigger. The debate had given her a platform, but she refused to let it define her. Instead of becoming just another culture war talking point, she built something new, an initiative for students across the country, regardless of political beliefs, who wanted real, honest debate without fear of being shut down. A network of people willing to talk, listen, and challenge ideas without resorting to labels or insults. And it started working. Universities that once ignored conservative students now had to take them seriously. Students on both sides, who had once feared backlash for their beliefs, finally had a space to engage without being dismissed. She had done something Lawson never could. She had turned debate into action. As she stepped onto the stage for her next talk, she realized something. It had never been about winning. It was about proving that ideas, not insults, shape the future. That night wasn't just about one debate, one insult, or one viral clip. It was about what happens when people stop listening, when intellectuals become gatekeepers instead of educators, when students are told that some voices matter more than others. But here's the truth. No one has a monopoly on the conversation. And whether you agree with Karoline or not, one thing is certain. She earned her voice. Now the question is, will you?